Some forces don't announce themselves in presence. They arrive in silence, after the noise has faded, after the text messages stop, the doors close, and the world assumes the story has ended. But some stories don't end. They echo. And in that echo lies absence, the unseen force that shapes souls more deeply than any embrace ever could. In every human life, there is a moment when someone vanishes, not in death, but in distance. It is then that you begin to feel the quiet gravity of what remains unseen. For some, that absence becomes a wound. For others, it becomes an awakening. Yet in the end, it always reveals the truth. You were never missing them, you were missing yourself. Carl Jung once wrote that what we deny controls us. Absence is one of the most profound denials. We flee from it, fill it, distract ourselves from it, yet it follows, patient and invisible, waiting for the moment when we are still enough to listen. She was one of those women whose silence could speak louder than desire. When she withdrew, the world around her trembled. Not because she intended to cause pain, but because she carried within her a kind of gravity that men did not understand until it was gone. He was one of those men who mistook attention for love. To him, her presence had always been an answer. Proof of importance, validation for his hunger. So when she finally stepped back into her stillness, he did not feel abandoned, he felt exposed. For the first time, he realized that what he missed was not her warmth, but the reflection of himself he could only see through her eyes. This is how absence begins its sacred work. It takes away the mirrors in which we mistake reflection for identity. It strips the ego of its costumes, the performance of worthiness, the illusion of control, the false safety of being needed. The unseen force moves quietly, beneath every heartbreak, beneath every silence. It whispers the same question again and again. Who are you when no one is watching? She did not leave out of anger. She left because she understood, at last, that love without consciousness becomes dependency, and affection without reciprocity becomes depletion. Her silence was not a punishment, it was an invitation, an initiation. Through absence, she became a mirror to the unseen, the anima in its purest form, untethered and luminous, beckoning the masculine to confront his shadow without her tending to it. He tried to find her in others, but every new face only deepened the void she had left behind. Because she was not a person, she was an archetype, and archetypes cannot be replaced. They can only be integrated. Absence reveals the unconscious. When she withdrew, he saw not only her, but everything he had buried beneath her presence. His fear of rejection, his dependence on admiration, his unspoken hunger to be mothered, not met. That is how the feminine teaches, not through noise but through withdrawal. Her absence became the space where his ego dissolved and his soul began to stir. Jung called it the confrontation with the shadow. It is the moment when the persona cracks, when the man is forced to meet the fragments of himself he projected onto her. He doesn't yet know it, but her leaving is the beginning of his individuation. And for her, absence becomes creation. The more she detaches, the more she remembers that her worth was never tied to being seen, that she was not made to orbit someone else's need, that her softness was never weakness. It was medicine misused by the unready. Her detachment is not coldness. It is the warmth turned inward. It is self-respect clothed in quiet. She begins to understand that absence, when chosen, is not emptiness, it is alignment. In this story, as in all human stories, absence does not simply mark an ending. It awakens archetypes. The woman becomes the unseen teacher. The man becomes the seeker. And absence itself becomes the initiator, the invisible hand guiding both toward wholeness through loss. The narrator's voice softens. Some women do not chase, not because they do not care, but because they understand that the soul cannot grow in captivity. And some men do not forget, because the silence of a conscious woman is not an absence. It is a mirror reflecting everything he has yet to face. As the candle burns lower, the story begins to shift. We start to see absence not as void, but as a living force with many faces, each one carrying a lesson, each one reshaping the soul that dares to face it. There are three great archetypes of absence that walk beside every soul's journey. They are not seen but felt, not spoken but known. The first is the ghost of longing, the ache of what was never fully yours, yet shaped you all the same. The second is the mirror of shadow, the painful reflection of everything you denied until love made you remember. And the third is the phoenix of wholeness, the rebirth that comes only after you have made peace with the silence. The narrator pauses, voice low and deliberate. Each archetype reveals a different way the soul learns through absence, a different wound, a different awakening, a different mirror through which you finally see yourself. And so the journey begins. Longing is the ghost that refuses to die. It lingers between presence and memory, between what was said and what was never allowed to be spoken. It is the soft haunting that curls around the heart at night, whispering of unfinished conversations, of hands almost touched, of glances that promised eternity yet delivered silence. The ghost of longing is the first archetype of absence, the one that teaches through ache. It is born the moment you lose what you never truly possessed. For him, she became a shadow he could not exorcise. He could no longer call her, yet her absence rang louder than her voice ever did. He replayed their moments together, not to remember, but to relive. Every laugh became an echo, every touch a fragment of proof that he was once desired, once seen. But what he was chasing was not her. It was himself, reflected in her eyes. He mistook her presence for identity, her attention for validation. Now, in her absence, he must face the hollowness that had been waiting beneath the noise all along. This is where the ghost of longing thrives. In the gap between illusion and reality. In the desperate attempt to resurrect a feeling that was never meant to last. The woman, on the other hand, walks through her own silence differently. She feels the ache too, but she does not feed it. She lets it ache. She lets it breathe, because she knows that longing, if left untouched, transforms. It shifts from craving into clarity, from "I miss you" into "I see myself." The pain of missing him becomes the medicine that reveals her own dependency, her desire to be understood, her fear of invisibility, her hunger to be chosen. But absence has a strange way of turning the mirror back on its owner. She begins to see that she had always been her own ghost, half alive in her own story, waiting for someone else to give her meaning. The ghost of longing is seductive. It doesn't hurt all at once. It seeps slowly, like water finding the cracks of a foundation. You tell yourself it's love, but it's really memory wearing the mask of desire. You check the phone. You scroll through old messages, searching for proof that what you felt was real. You replay the warmth, trying to outrun the cold. But longing, when observed without acting on it, reveals something profound. It is not proof of love, it is proof of attachment. And attachment, when stripped of awareness, becomes dependency. The feminine begins to understand this first. Her stillness teaches her what her words cannot. That sometimes the soul must ache in order to release what was never aligned with it. In Jungian language, the ghost of longing represents the projection of the Anima and Animus. The part of ourselves we exile, then seek in others. She had projected her inner masculine onto him, her need for safety, stability, and direction. He had projected his inner feminine onto her, his need for empathy, nurturing, and emotional connection. Their connection, though beautiful, was a reflection of disowned selves. And when projection dissolves, what remains feels like death. That death is the first initiation of absence. It is the shattering of illusion. It is the dismantling of dependency disguised as devotion. The ghost of longing tests every soul that dares to love deeply. It asks one question with merciless tenderness. Will you chase the reflection, or will you turn inward and find its source? Most people run. They rush into new distractions, new faces, new flames, trying to silence the ghost through repetition. But the ghost only follows, because it is not born from them, it is born from you. The ache is not in their absence. It is in your avoidance of yourself. He begins to notice it too, though he doesn't yet understand. He finds her laughter in other women, but it never sounds quite right. He reaches for their hands, but their touch never carries the same weight. Because he is not chasing her, he is chasing the version of himself he lost in her. This is the unseen tragedy of projection. You spend years looking for the person who once mirrored your best self, forgetting that you were the one who placed that mirror there. And yet, it is also the beginning of awakening. For her, longing becomes softer with time. She begins to see absence as an altar, a sacred space where illusion burns and truth is reborn. She no longer resents the emptiness. She listens to it. The ghost of longing becomes her teacher, showing her the difference between emotional attachment and soul recognition. She realizes that what she had mistaken for destiny was really dependency. That what she wanted from him was the reflection of the woman she had not yet met, herself. This realization does not come as lightning. It comes as quiet. The kind of quiet that hums beneath grief. The kind that feels like both loss and liberation at once. In trauma psychology, this stage mirrors the withdrawal from the trauma bond. The painful disentanglement of chemistry from consciousness. Her nervous system mourns the pattern as though it were a person. But with each tear, the spell weakens. With each breath, she becomes less reactive, more rooted. This is what Stoics understood as well. That longing, when endured without self-pity, becomes strength. The ache refines. The silence purifies. The woman who once reached outward for validation now turns inward and discovers sovereignty. And he, though slower, begins to change too. One night, sitting in the dim light of a room that no longer smells like her perfume, he stops scrolling through their old photos. He simply stares into the dark and whispers, "What if she was never meant to stay? What if she was meant to awaken?" That thought, fragile, fleeting, marks the first fracture in his ego. The first glimpse of humility. He realizes that he did not lose her. He lost the illusion that he owned her presence. The ghost of longing begins to fade once the lesson is learned. It doesn't disappear, it transforms. The ache becomes gratitude. The absence becomes meaning. And what once felt like punishment becomes purification. She walks differently now, not lighter, but truer. Every step carries the weight of understanding. She no longer looks back. Not because she's forgotten, but because she's integrated. For to integrate the ghost of longing is to accept that love's truest purpose was never to keep, but to mirror what must be healed. The narrator's voice lowers, almost like a whisper. The ghost of longing teaches the soul its first great truth. That absence is not emptiness, but the echo of what you were meant to find within yourself. And as the ghost dissolves, a new reflection begins to emerge. Darker, deeper, and far more demanding. The next archetype waits beyond the ache. The mirror of shadow. Silence has a strange power. When the ache of longing fades, what remains is not peace. It is reflection. Unforgiving. Unavoidable. Unseen until it stares back from the dark. This is the second archetype of absence. The mirror of shadow. It does not whisper like longing. It confronts. It forces the soul to look at what it has hidden, to meet the unflattering truths beneath desire, beneath pride, beneath performance. For him, the silence she left behind becomes a room with no doors. At first, he tries to fill it, with distraction, with work, with new bodies that smell like momentary relief. But every pleasure turns to static, every laughter feels rehearsed. Every morning brings the same dull ache of meaninglessness, because her absence is no longer about her. It is about the mirror she left behind. In that mirror, he begins to see himself, the fragments he once projected outward, his fear of inadequacy, his hunger for control, his unhealed boyish craving to be adored without truly being known. The reflection doesn't flatter him. It exposes him. This is the shadow. The part of the psyche Jung said we spend a lifetime avoiding. And yet, it waits for moments exactly like this to emerge. For her, the mirror of shadow feels different. It does not confront through chaos, but through stillness. She begins to see her own reflection in the people she once blamed. The lovers who couldn't stay. The friendships that crumbled under the weight of unspoken needs. The patterns that repeated so precisely they seemed fated. she begins to realize it was never about them. It was about the energy she kept unconsciously recreating, the unhealed wound that kept calling itself destiny. That is how the shadow seduces. It disguises itself as love, as chemistry, as connection. But really, it is the soul trying to show you what remains unhealed. The narrator's voice lowers, rhythmic and slow. Shadow is not darkness. Shadow is rejected light. It is everything you could not accept about yourself, now wearing the face of another. He had worshipped her, but what he truly loved was his projection, his own softness, his vulnerability, his longing, all the traits he had buried in his pursuit of control. He called her muse, but she was merely reflecting the soul he refused to meet. And when she left, that reflection shattered. He thought she took the light with her, but she only took the illusion. Now, surrounded by the shards of his own image, he is forced to look down, not at her absence, but at his own emptiness. This is the mirror of shadow. It shows not who you loved, but what you refuse to love within yourself. For the woman, this mirror appears as emotion, a sudden wave of grief she can't explain, a pang of anger that rises for no reason, a longing to be seen by those who never will. At first, she mistakes it for regression, as if she's moving backward in her healing. But the truth is deeper. The shadow does not visit to punish, it visits to reveal. Through the mirror of absence, she begins to see the parts of herself she silenced for survival. The woman who stayed quiet to keep peace, the girl who accepted crumbs and called it love, the goddess who dimmed her fire to be understood. The mirror demands she look, not gently, not kindly, but truthfully. This is where trauma meets consciousness. Every abandonment reopens the original wound, the one formed long before romance ever existed. The shadow pulls her backward through time, showing her the faces of those who could not love her, and the faces of those she could not forgive. This confrontation is not poetic, it's primal. It shakes her, makes her want to close the mirror and return to longing, because longing at least feels beautiful. Shadow feels raw, ugly, unglamorous. But shadow work is the path to freedom. It dismantles the false self piece by piece until all that remains is the truth. In Jungian individuation, this stage is sacred. It is where projection collapses and integration begins. She no longer blames him for what he could not give. She asks herself why she expected it from him. She no longer resents his silence. She recognizes her own fear of being alone. Each realization burns, but it also cleanses. Shadow work is a kind of inner alchemy, turning pain into awareness, turning grief into wisdom, turning absence into autonomy. The feminine that once waited for rescue now learns to become her own savior. Meanwhile, in his world, something begins to stir. He notices that the women he attracts all carry the same energy. They adore him first, then resent him later. Each relationship becomes a reflection of the last. Each ending feels eerily familiar. And one evening, as he stares into the dim glow of his phone, he realizes it's not them. It's him. It has always been him. The mirror of shadow reveals his hidden truth. He had built his identity around control because he feared rejection. Every conquest was an attempt to outrun the boy inside him, who still believed he was not enough. Her absence didn't break him, it unmasked him. When the mirror becomes unbearable, most people look away. But those who dare to look through it find liberation on the other side. For her, the mirror becomes a portal, one that leads not outward but inward. The woman she meets there is not broken. She is whole, wild, unapologetically alive. She is the embodiment of the feminine shadow. Instinctive, emotional, intuitive, sacredly untamed. To accept this woman is to reclaim power. To reject her is to remain haunted. The narrator pauses, voice tender now, reflective. The mirror of shadow does not destroy love. It refines it. It separates infatuation from intimacy, need from connection, dependency from devotion. In its reflection, both the man and the woman begin to see. What they called love was often self-avoidance. What they called forever was often fear. And what they called loss was actually the invitation to grow. In Stoic wisdom, this stage mirrors a more fatty, to love one's fate even when it burns, to bow before what is real, even when it shatters your dreams, because only through the shattering does the soul remember itself. By the time they both reach the end of this mirror, they are no longer who they were. He has begun to listen, truly listen, to silence, and she has begun to create from her solitude. The storm between them has become a still lake, reflecting the truth that once terrified them both. There was never an enemy, only mirrors. The narrator whispers, "When you look into the mirror of shadow long enough, you realize that absence was never cruelty. It was consciousness calling you home." And as the last reflection fades, something luminous begins to rise from the ashes of pain. A new force, a new archetype, the one that burns away all illusions, the phoenix of wholeness. Every transformation begins with fire, but this fire is not found outside you. It ignites within the wreckage of everything you thought you were. This is the third archetype of absence, the phoenix of wholeness, the rebirth that follows surrender, the light that emerges when there is nothing left to lose. In the mythology of the soul, the phoenix is not a bird. It is a state of consciousness. It is what happens when grief and awareness collide, when you finally stop trying to return to who you were, and instead rise into who you truly are. The mirror of shadow burned away their illusions. What remains now is essence, raw, pure, terrifyingly honest. For her, the fire begins softly, not with rage but with acceptance. She no longer fights the memory of him, nor clings to it. She simply allows it to be. A chapter that once defined her now becomes a paragraph in a greater story, the story of awakening. In her solitude, she begins to remember herself. Not the self shaped by longing or the need to be chosen, but the self that existed before the world told her who she should be. The wild, intuitive, creative force that was never broken, only buried. This remembrance feels like resurrection. She starts to create again, to write, to dance, to build, to breathe with purpose. Every action becomes a prayer to her own becoming. The phoenix is not born in perfection. It is born in ashes, in that place where nothing external can define you anymore. She realizes, he was never the source of her fire. He was merely the spark that reminded her of it. For him, the fire arrives differently. It begins with a collapse. The persona he wore, confident, composed, in control, disintegrates under the weight of his own awareness. At first, he resists. He tries to rebuild the old identity, to find meaning in the same patterns, to chase the same illusions. But each attempt burns faster than the last. Eventually, exhaustion replaces resistance. And in that moment of surrender, something sacred occurs. He begins to feel, truly feel, the grief, the guilt, the tenderness. Emotions he had long buried beneath ambition and armor now rise like smoke, curling around his soul, softening him. This is the masculine's resurrection. Not dominance restored, but vulnerability reclaimed. He realizes that love was never about possession. It was about presence. And for the first time, he understands what it means to be here. The phoenix teaches a law older than time. To rise, one must burn. To create anew, one must release what was. And to love without fear, one must die to illusion. She lets go of the fantasy of reunion. He lets go of the fantasy of control. And in their letting go, they meet again, not as lovers bound by attachment, but as souls aligned in freedom. They no longer need each other to be whole, because wholeness has already found them both. In Jungian alchemy, this stage is called conjunction, the sacred union. But it is not the union of two people. It is the marriage of the inner masculine and feminine, the Animus and Anima reconciled within the psyche. Her fire merges with his stillness. His logic merges with her intuition. Together, they form an integrated self, capable of love that is neither dependent nor avoidant, but divine. This is not romance. This is transcendence. The narrator's tone slows, reverent, like a prayer whispered over embers. The phoenix does not return to its old nest. It builds anew, from the fragments of wisdom gathered through pain. For her, that means embodying the woman who no longer chases closure. She is the closure. She is the answer. She no longer seeks to be chosen, because she finally chose herself. For him, it means learning that power is not control. It is consciousness. The strength to stay open in the presence of truth, to hold emotion without turning it into performance, to love without losing identity. The world feels different now. Colors seem more vivid, sounds more alive. The air itself charged with meaning, because awakening changes perception, not the outer world, but the lens through which you see it. Absence no longer hurts. It teaches. Love no longer binds. It liberates. They may never meet again, and yet they are no longer apart, because the souls that burn together in awakening remain connected in essence, not as unfinished lovers, but as mirrors that helped each other remember who they are. Their connection transcends time, space, story. It becomes energy, a quiet blessing passed between lifetimes. The narrator breathes softly, voice fading into light. The phoenix of wholeness is not the end of love. It is the beginning of real love. A love born not from need, but from freedom. The fire consumes illusion, but it also illuminates truth. And the truth is this: you were never broken. You were only becoming. Every silence, every heartbreak, every ending was the fire guiding you home. There is a stillness that arrives after fire, a silence so profound it feels like eternity breathing. This is where she stands now, barefoot on the ashes of her becoming. Everything that once defined her, the ache, the longing, the man, the mirrors, the myths, has dissolved into smoke. What remains is essence, pure, untamed. The unseen force that once haunted her is now the pulse that moves through her veins. It was never him. It was always her own soul, calling her back to remembrance. The phoenix has risen, but it does not need to soar. It hovers quietly in light, content not to be seen, but to be. Wholeness does not crave witnesses. It simply exists. It is the state beyond performance, beyond narrative, beyond the endless dance of chase and retreat. She no longer asks, "What does he feel in my absence?" Because the question itself dissolves in awakening. In the truth of who she has become, his absence is no longer a loss. It is a lesson completed. Somewhere in another city, he feels something he cannot name. It arrives without warning, in the middle of a conversation, a scent that passes like memory through the air. It's not nostalgia. It's not regret. It's awareness. A quiet knowing that the woman he once held was not just another chapter. She was the mirror of his own unfinished soul. He realizes that love is not measured by possession, but by the depth of transformation it awakens. And though she is gone, her absence remains sacred, not as emptiness, but as light. The unseen force now moves through him too. He begins to listen more, to feel more, to exist more consciously. He no longer confuses silence with rejection, nor distance with punishment. He understands? Her departure was not cruelty, it was initiation. In the language of Jung, this is individuation, the sacred unfolding of the self into its wholeness. It is when the anima within the man, and the animus within the woman, cease their projection and find home within. The unseen force that once magnetized them toward each other was not destiny, but reflection, the unconscious seeking completion through another's eyes. Now they see through their own. Now they are the mirror. She no longer waits for his return. Instead, she returns to herself every morning, with gentleness, with gratitude, with a smile that feels like sunlight through the ribs of the universe. Her love has changed shape, from longing to luminosity. Every gesture, every silence, every boundary she holds, is now an act of devotion to her own being. She does not need to announce her worth. Her energy speaks it. Her absence has become her presence, a quiet power that ripples through everything she touches. The narrator's voice softens, as if speaking directly into the listener's chest. You see, absence is not empty. It is full of memory, of meaning, of the soul's own rebirth. The unseen force was never what left you. It was what stayed, watching you learn how to let go. Every heartbreak was an invitation. Every silence, a sacred teacher. Every ending, an entrance into the next version of you. The woman who once broke open has now become the flame itself. Steady, luminous, undemanding. She burns not to be seen, but to see. In the quiet aftermath, she walks through her life differently. Not softer, not colder, but clearer. She can sit across from someone without losing herself in their gaze. She can love without dissolving. She can give without depletion. Her love is no longer transaction, it is transmission. When she enters a room, people feel her before they notice her. Not because she seeks attention, but because her energy moves differently now. Anchored, rooted, radiant. She has become her own gravity. And somewhere, far beyond the story, he feels it, not as pain, but as presence. The unseen force that once pulled him toward her, now awakens within him as the same light. Because true love, the kind born in awareness, never ends. It only evolves. The polarity between them no longer fuels a chase, but a balance. Feminine and masculine, absence and presence, moon and sun, no longer in conflict, but in dance. This is not about reunion. It is about resonance. A quiet harmony that lingers long after the story closes. The narrator pauses. A breath. A silence that feels infinite. Then the final whisper. The unseen force that defines your soul was never someone else's love. It was your own awareness awakening through absence. Every person you've ever lost was never gone. They were mirrors, showing you how to return to yourself. And when you finally arrive, whole, luminous, alive, you understand the secret the phoenix always knew. The woman who walks away in silence isn't weak. She simply sees more.